Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back into a world lit by oil lamps and governed by an authority so absolute it feels almost alien to us now. Imagine, for a moment, that you are not in your familiar bed, but lying swaddled in rough-spun wool inside a Roman home. The air is cool and smells faintly of olive oil, wood smoke, and something herbal. You hear the soft, shuffling feet of a midwife and the tired, relieved breathing of your mother. You've just arrived. But your journey, and indeed your very survival, has only just begun. Unlike our modern world, where your arrival is a celebration by default, here it's more of a proposal, one that can be rejected. You probably won't survive this on your first go, if we're being honest. It's not just the dicey medical situation, it's the legal one. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from, so drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first sensations are of gentle but firm hands. The midwife, a woman with work-roughened fingers, has washed you with warm water. She has checked your limbs, listened to your cry, and is now swaddling you tightly. You are a bundle of potential, a small, breathing question mark in a room that feels both momentous and utterly ordinary. The flickering light from a nearby clay lamp throws long, dancing shadows on the plastered walls, which are perhaps painted with faded scenes of birds or simple geometric patterns. There's no bright, sterile hospital lighting here. Everything is soft, dim, and close. The door to the small room creaks open. Your mother shifts on her birthing stool or couch, her exhausted gaze fixed on the doorway, and then he enters. This is your father, the paterfamilias. He isn't a senator in gleaming white toga, nor a legionary commander fresh from the German frontier. He is just a man, perhaps a potter, his hands stained with the memory of clay. Or a grain merchant with a perpetually worried line etched between his brows. Or a landowner smelling of the earth and the sun. He looks tired, maybe a little anxious, but his face is a mask of stern composure. He carries the weight of the household, its fortunes, its reputation, its rituals, upon his shoulders. And you, this tiny, helpless thing, are a new and unknown variable. He says nothing at first. He simply watches as the midwife, with a practiced and almost ceremonial slowness, carries you across the room. There's a silent understanding here, a ritual as old as the 7 hills themselves. She does not hand you to him. She does not place you in your mother's arms. Instead, she stoops and lays you down on the cool earthen floor at his feet. You lie there on a simple piece of cloth, a tiny human offering. This is the first and most terrifying law of your new life. It is the core of Roman society, a concept known as patria potestas, literally, the power of the father. It is an authority so vast, so all-encompassing, that it's difficult for us to fully grasp. It's not about being grounded or losing your allowance. Under this law, your father has the power of life and death over his children. He owns you, as surely as he owns the house you're in, the slaves who work in it, and the cup from which he drinks his wine. You are property. And now, at this very moment, he is deciding whether to keep you. The air in the room is thick with unspoken prayers. Your mother, silent, watches her husband. The midwife averts her gaze, her work done. Now, only he matters. He looks down at you. Is he looking for a strong cry, a sign of health, Does he see the features of his own father in your face? Is he thinking about the dowry he would one day need if you are a girl, or the cost of an education if you are a boy? A family, after all, is also a business and enterprise. An extra mouth is an extra expense. His decision isn't just emotional, it's deeply practical. Historians still argue whether this power of life and death, the right to expose an unwanted infant, was a common, brutal reality or a rarely invoked legal threat used to underscore a father's ultimate authority. For you, lying on the floor, the academic debate feels rather immediate. He crouches down, his knees cracking softly. He peers at you, his shadow falling over you like a mountain. Suddenly, a tiny, almost comical event occurs. You sneeze, a little puff of air. In the solemnity of the room, it's a ridiculous sound. But for some Romans, a sneeze at a crucial moment could be seen as a favourable omen, a tiny sign of divine approval from the household gods. Perhaps he sees it as such, or perhaps he simply sees a child, a continuation of his line, his legacy. Slowly, deliberately, he reaches down. His hands, large and capable, slide underneath you. He lifts you from the ground. This gesture, this simple act of raising you into the air, is called tollere liberum. He has accepted you. The tension in the room breaks like a drawn thread, a soft, collective exhale. Your mother closes her eyes in relief. You have been officially received into the family. Your existence has been ratified. He holds you for a moment, turning you over, looking at this new person who is his to command, until the day he dies. He might say your name aloud for the first time, a name chosen for you, tying you to a long line of ancestors. But this is not a tender Hollywood moment. There is no swell of orchestral music. It's a quiet, sober act of possession. It's the closing of a deal. You have passed the first great filter. You get to live. You have been formally entered onto the balance sheet of the Roman family. For now you are safe from the elements, from the stray dogs of the alleyway. You are safe, that is, inside the gilded, inescapable cage of your father's hand. Your life is his, and it will remain his for a very, very long time. You spend the next few years in the hazy, warm world of early childhood, a time dominated by your mother and the household slaves. Your world is small, the central atrium with its opening to the sky, the small enclosed garden, the warm kitchen that always smells of baking bread and roasting garlic. Your father is a distant figure, a presence more than a person. You hear his voice from other rooms, a low, firm rumble giving orders. You see him in the mornings before he leaves for the forum or the fields, and in the evenings when he returns, tired and demanding dinner. His authority is like the weather, an unchangeable fact of your life. It's not angry or constantly violent. It's just there, a pressure in the air you learn to breathe. You learn early not to run screaming through the atrium when he is meeting with a client, and not to interrupt him when he is performing the daily rites to the Lares and Penates, the household gods whose tiny, solemn statues sit in their shrine. As you grow, the paths for you and your siblings, if you have any, begin to diverge starkly. If you are a boy, your life slowly moves into your father's orbit. Once you are around 7 years old, you are gently prized from the women's quarters. The days of unstructured play are over. Your father, the paterfamilias, is now your primary educator. This doesn't mean he sits down with you for hours with wax tablets and a stylus. He might do that if he's of a scholarly bent, but more likely he hires a tutor, a literator for the basics of reading, writing and arithmetic. This tutor is often a Greek slave, someone highly educated, but still subject to your father's command. Your education is your father's project. You are expected to be his shadow. You follow him to the market, learning to watch how he negotiates for olives, how he assesses the quality of a bolt of cloth, how he speaks with his peers, a complex dance of respect, veiled boasts and careful inquiries. You sit quietly in a corner while he conducts business, your young mind absorbing the rhythm of Roman commerce. If he is a farmer, you walk the fields with him, learning the names of the constellations that tell you when to plant and when to harvest. If he's a craftsman, you learn the feel of wood or metal, the scent of the workshop, the satisfying heft of a well-made tool. It's an apprenticeship not just in a trade, but in being a Roman man. Your moral education is paramount. You are taught the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. These are the unwritten rules of Roman virtue, pietas, duty to family, gods and country, gravitas, a sense of seriousness and purpose, and dignitas, reputation and personal honor. These aren't abstract concepts. They are demonstrated. You might witness him settle a dispute between tenants with a firm but fair hand. You will certainly watch him lead the family in religious observances, pouring a libation of wine and offering a portion of the meal to the household spirits. He doesn't necessarily explain why. He simply does, and you are expected to watch, to learn and to understand that this is the way things are done. This is what it means to be a part of his lineage. Now, if you are a girl, your education is no less rigorous, but it takes place entirely within the home. Your father's expectations for you are different, but just as absolute. Your mother, acting as his agent, is your teacher. You are being groomed for one primary role, to be the capable wife of another Roman man, to run a household of your own someday. While your brother is learning Virgil and practicing his sums, you are learning to spin wool. The clatter of the loom is the soundtrack to your childhood. A woman's skill with textiles was a mark of high virtue, a visible sign of her industriousness and modesty. It wasn't just a quaint hobby, it was a core economic contribution to the household. You learn to manage supplies, to direct slaves in the kitchen, to keep household accounts on a wax tablet. You learn about medicinal herbs and how to tend to the sick. Your education is intensely practical, aimed at making you a valuable asset in a future marriage alliance, which your father will, of course, arrange. You might learn to read and write, especially if you're from an upper-class family. It's useful for running a large estate. But your world remains bounded by the walls of your home. You don't follow your father to the forum. You don't sit in on his business dealings. You learn of the outside world through the conversations of the men, through the gossip of the slaves. In all of this, your father's approval is the sun you orbit. A quiet nod from him is a monumental victory. A scowl of disappointment can ruin your week. The authority is so constant that it's rarely spoken of. There's a strange but well-documented little historical fact that highlights this. Roman children wore a special amulet called a bulla around their necks. For boys, it was worn until they officially came of age. This amulet was thought to ward off evil spirits, but it also served as a visual reminder of their status as children, protected but also powerless. It was a dog collar, a really, really fancy one to be fair. It marked you as being under the absolute protection and control of your paterfamilias. You were not yet your own person, and you never really felt you would be. There's no teenage rebellion as we know it. What would be the point? Arguing with your father would be like arguing with an earthquake. It's a force of nature. His word is law not because he is necessarily wiser or better, but simply because he is a father. This unquestioned hierarchy is the bedrock of your reality. And while this might sound oppressive, for you it is also a source of security. Your path is clear. Your duties are defined. You do not have the modern anxiety of finding yourself. You know exactly who you are. You are the son or daughter of your father. Your identity is his. And every lesson, every chore, every supervised outing is designed to shape you into the person he requires you to be. It's a quiet, steady, relentless process of molding, with his hand always on the chisel. The years pass. The boy who followed his father to the market now stands a man. If you are him, you've put aside the purple-bordered toga of boyhood and now wear the plain white toga of a citizen. You may have served your time in the legions, perhaps seeing the misty forests of Gaul or the dusty plains of Syria. You might be a budding lawyer, making a name for yourself with clever arguments in the basilica. You could be running the family's shipping business, managing warehouses down at the bustling port of Ostia. You are, to all outward appearances, an adult. You are respected by your peers. You command soldiers or manage employees. You might even be married with children of your own. And yet, in the eyes of Roman law, you are still a toddler. This is perhaps the most bizarre and difficult to swallow aspect of Patria Potestas. It did not end when you came of age. It did not end when you married. It did not end if you became a famous senator or a conquering general. As long as your father, your paterfamilias, was alive, you remained under his power. You were filius familias, a son of the family, and legally you were a dependent. Imagine this scenario. You, a successful merchant in your 30s, have just negotiated a brilliant deal, securing a contract to supply Spanish olive oil to a dozen wealthy households. The profits are substantial, but that money is not yours. You cannot legally own it. It flows directly into the family treasury, which is controlled in its entirety by your father. The fine house you live in, it's his. The educated slave who tutors your children, he belongs to your father. Even the toga on your back and the sandals on your feet were technically purchased with his funds. You have no property of your own. You cannot enter into a contract without his permission. You cannot sell a donkey, buy a small plot of land, or even, strictly speaking, free a slave. You are a legal non-entity, a 40-year-old man who legally owns less than a modern 7-year-old with a piggy bank. It's like working the best job of your life, but your dad gets your paycheck and gives you an allowance. A very, very long-term allowance. Of course, in daily life, this wasn't always as draconian as it sounds on paper. A sensible father would grant his adult son a peculium, which was a fund or property, maybe a business, a farm, a sum of money, for him to manage as if it were his own. This gave you practical autonomy. You could run the business, make decisions, and live off the proceeds. But the key phrase here is as if. Legally, the peculium still belonged to your father, and he could, if he so chose, revoke it at any time, for any reason. It was a grant, not a right. This legal fiction allowed Roman society to function, letting competent sons get on with the business of being successful, while still preserving the father's ultimate authority. Historians still argue whether the extreme edge of this law was often used by fathers against successful adult sons. Was it common for a capricious elderly paterfamilias to suddenly reclaim a business his son had built up for 20 years? Or was it more of a theoretical power, a legal backstop that reinforced the social order but was rarely deployed in such a destructive way? The surviving legal texts and letters from figures like Cicero suggest that while disputes happened, there was a strong social expectation for fathers to act reasonably. Ruining your successful son for no good reason would damage your own dignitas, your standing in the community. Still, the power was there, a quiet threat lurking behind every decision, and this applied to every facet of life. Let's say you are that lawyer and you need to bring a lawsuit against a business rival. You cannot do it in your own name. Your father must initiate the suit on your behalf. If you commit a crime or incur a debt, your father is legally responsible for you. This could be a benefit, a kind of paternal safety net, but it was also a profound curtailment of your personhood. You existed as an extension of him. Now consider the fringe, almost darkly comedic side of this. Say you're that decorated legionary, home from a campaign. You've faced down Germanic tribesmen in the Teutoburg forest. You've stormed fortifications. You've shown incredible bravery. The Emperor himself has awarded you for valor. You feel like the master of your own destiny. Then you get home, walk into the family villa, and your 80-year-old father, who hasn't left the city in 30 years, tells you that he disapproves of the friend you're bringing to dinner and forbids you from seeing him again. Legally, you must obey. Or, even more fundamentally, he could, in theory, order you to divorce your wife, the woman you love, the mother of your children, because he has decided on a more politically advantageous match. The power was that absolute. Your own children, the ones you hold and teach and love, they aren't legally your children. They fall under the potestas of their grandfather, your father. You are merely a middle manager in the family structure. The ultimate CEO is the paterfamilias. When your own son is born, you would reenact that same scene from your own birth. You would present the infant to your father, and it would be his decision, not yours, whether to accept the child into the family. Your authority over your own household was entirely delegated, a temporary stewardship granted by the man who still held ultimate power over you. You were a grown man playing house, with everything you built resting on the foundation of your father's continuing life and goodwill. Now, let's step into the shoes of a daughter. For you, the iron authority of your father defines the most significant transition of your life, your marriage. While your brother might chafe under the legal reality of being a legal toddler, while forging a public career, your life is shaped by a different, but equally rigid, set of paternal expectations. Your value, in the cold calculus of the Roman family, is measured by your virtue, your health, and your ability to form a bridge between your birth family and another. You don't date. You don't choose your partner based on love or mutual attraction, those fleeting feelings that Romans were deeply suspicious of as a basis for something as serious as a family alliance. Your father chooses your husband. This isn't a surprise. It's the natural order of things, something you have been prepared for since you first learned to work a loom. The negotiations might begin when you're as young as 12 or 13, though the marriage itself might wait a few years. Your father will meet with other paterfamilias. They will discuss dowries, political advantages, and the consolidation of neighboring lands. You are a key piece on the chessboard of family strategy. Your consent is not required. It's not even a factor in the discussion. A good, dutiful daughter was expected to trust her father's judgment implicitly. To protest would be an act of shocking impiety, a violation of the pietas that held the family together. Your father isn't necessarily being cruel. In his mind, he is doing his primary duty as a parent, securing your future and the future of his lineage in the best way he knows how. The day of your wedding arrives. You put away your childhood toys and your bulla, that amulet we mentioned earlier that marked you as a protected child. You are dressed in a special tunic, tied with a knot of Hercules, which only your new husband is permitted to untie. Your hair is elaborately braided in 6 locks, a tradition of deep and ancient significance. But the most important legal event of the day is a transfer. There were 2 main forms of Roman marriage. In the older, more traditional form, called a marriage in manu, literally in hand, you experienced a complete legal transfer. You walked out of your father's house, and with that, you walked out from under his patria potestas. You ceased to be his legal responsibility, his property. But you didn't become a free woman. Instead, you passed directly into the hand of your husband, or more accurately, into the hand of your husband's father, if he was still alive. You effectively became his legal daughter, subject to his authority just as his own children were. One patriarch's authority was simply swapped for another's. Your obedience just had a new address. It's a sobering thought, a lateral move in the world of absolute obedience. Over time, especially during the late Republic and into the Empire, another form of marriage became more common. Marriage sine manu, without the hand. This is a fascinating legal shift. In a sine manu marriage, you did not pass into your husband's control. You legally remained under the patria potestas of your own father, even while living in your husband's home. This had some strange but significant consequences. For one, your dowry and any property you stood to inherit remained tied to your birth family. It protected your family's assets from a potentially wasteful or unlucky son-in-law. It also meant that if your father died, you could become legally independent and control your own property, a status known as sui juris, even while married. This gave some upper-class Roman women a surprising degree of financial autonomy compared to their in manu sisters. But the catch was, as long as your father lived, he was still the one with the final say. He could, in some cases, even force you to divorce your husband, a power he would not have had in a manu marriage. Every legal arrangement came with its own particular brand of patriarchal control. But what about the sons? We left you as a 40-year-old general who couldn't buy a souvenir without asking Dad. Was there any escape? Yes, but it was exceptionally rare and entirely dependent on the father's whim. The process was called emancipatio. Emancipation wasn't about turning 18 or graduating. It was a complex and ceremonial legal act in which a father could voluntarily release his son from his potestas. It involved a convoluted ritual based on an ancient law from the 12 Tables that originally was meant to stop fathers from selling their sons into slavery more than 3 times. Leave it to the Romans to repurpose a law about human trafficking into a ceremony for adulthood. It involved a pretend sale of the son to a trusted friend, who would then free him. The process had to be repeated 3 times to permanently sever the paternal bond. Why would a father do this? Perhaps a son was entering a high-ranking political office that required legal independence. Maybe it was a reward for exceptional service or a way to allow a son to manage a risky business venture without endangering the entire family fortune. But it was not a common occurrence. To be emancipated was to be formally cut off from the ancestral line in some ways, and it had to be a deliberate, considered act by the patriarch himself. There was no appealing to a higher court. There was no petitioning the Senate. You could be a grizzled veteran with scars from 3 campaigns and still need your father to perform a strange bit of legal theatre with his friend, just so you could finally own your own house. The vast majority of Roman sons simply waited. They managed the peculium, raised their children, lived their lives, and waited for the one event that would, inevitably and finally, set them free. Years and then decades have passed. The hands that once lifted you from the earthen floor have grown wrinkled and frail. The voice that was once a rumble of unquestioned authority is now thin, perhaps wavering. Your father, the paterfamilias who has defined your entire existence, is dying. You stand by his bedside. The room is quiet, the air heavy with the scent of old age and medicinal herbs. The same oil lamps that lit the scene of your birth now cast their soft, flickering glow on the final chapter of his. If you are a son, this is a moment of profound and complex transition. You are watching not just a man's life end, but an entire era of your own. Your entire life, whether you are 30, 50, or even 70 years old, has been lived as a subordinate. Every major decision, every legal action, every significant property transaction has been filtered through his authority. You have lived in a state of perpetual legal childhood. Now, that is about to change. The moment he draws his last breath, something incredible happens. Something silent and invisible, but more seismically life-altering than any earthquake. The iron cage of patria potestas dissolves. It vanishes as if it had never been. In that instant, you become sui juris of one's own law. You are, for the very first time in your life, a legally independent person. A wave of responsibilities, once his, now crashes down upon you. You are the new paterfamilias. That title, that immense weight of authority and duty settles onto your shoulders. Suddenly your own sons, who were legally under your father's power just a moment ago, are now under yours. Your wife, if your marriage was in Manu, is now legally under your hand, like a daughter. The entire household, your unmarried sisters, your younger brothers who now become your dependents, the slaves, the tenant farmers, the sprawling network of clients who depended on your father for legal protection and financial support. All of it now looks to you. But first, there are the debts. With ownership comes liability. As the heir, you inherit not only the family farm and the house in the city, but also every single debt your father incurred. You must now sort through his accounts, his contracts, his promises. Did he owe money to a shipping magnate? Was there a mortgage on that parcel of land in Campania? Had he pledged a sum of money for the construction of a public bath? These are no longer his problems. They are yours. Fulfilling these obligations is a matter of pietas, of honor. To neglect the debts of one's father would be to tarnish the family name, to lose the dignitas he spent a lifetime building and that you are now tasked to uphold. This was a critical feature of Roman inheritance. You couldn't just take the good stuff and run. The assets and the liabilities were a single indivisible package. And then there is the will. Romans were meticulous about their wills. A properly witnessed will was a sacred document, a man's final act of control over the family he had governed his whole life. As his heir, your primary duty is to execute his wishes to the letter. He might have left specific legacies to his wife and other children, or even freed certain beloved slaves. One quirky but common provision was the funding of one's own funeral. A respectable Roman wanted a good send-off, and would often allocate a specific, sometimes substantial sum in his will for a grand procession, with professional mourners, musicians, and commemorative speeches. It was the ultimate status symbol, your final bit of advertising to the world. As the new head of the family, you now take on the religious duties. You are the chief priest of the household cult. It is now you who must make the daily offerings to the Lares and Penates, the ancestral spirits. It is you who must lead the rituals on important family days, remembering the anniversaries of births, deaths, and marriages. You are the link between the ancestors and the future generations. This wasn't a chore. It was the spiritual core of the family's identity, and a failure to perform these rites was seen as a grave dereliction of duty that could bring misfortune upon the entire household. If you are a daughter whose marriage was sine manu, your father's death also makes you sui juris. You remain in your husband's home, but you are now legally independent and have control over the property you just inherited from your father. You can write your own will, engage in business and manage your own affairs with a freedom that was unthinkable while he lived. You answer to no patriarch, not your deceased father, not your husband. For a Roman woman, this was the pinnacle of personal autonomy. The power is finally yours. You now hold the authority to arrange your children's marriages. You own the roof over your head. The profits from your work are your own. The absolute authority that defined your entire world is now the tool in your own hand. You look at your own son, a grown man perhaps, and realize that he now sees you in the same way you once saw your father, as the unshakable center of the family universe, the final arbiter, the source of all security and all restraint. The long shadow you lived in has not disappeared. You have simply grown to cast it yourself. The cycle begins anew. You have stepped into the old man's shoes, and they are heavier than you ever could have imagined. The mad monarchs of medieval Spain, settle in. Let the noise of your day gently fade, like the last light of a long sunset dissolving into the deep violet of twilight. We are drifting back in time, not to a field of clashing swords or a raucous throne room, but to a quieter, more intimate space. Find yourself in late 15th century Spain, a land of stark contrasts and simmering ambition. The sun beats down on the ochre-dusted plains of Castile, warming the ancient stones of its castles. A gentle breeze, a soft solano, carries the scent of wild thyme, rosemary, and dry earth through the open archways of a formidable fortress palace, an alcazar. Its architecture is a beautiful and complex dialogue between Christian and Islamic design. The Mudéjar style, with its intricate brickwork and delicate geometric plaster reliefs, a lingering echo of the recently vanquished Moorish kingdoms. Outside, the light is blinding, the landscape vast and unforgiving, but inside, the world changes. You are at the very heart of this newly forged Spain, in the court of its formidable rulers, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. Together they are known to history as the Catholic monarchs. They have just completed the centuries-long Reconquista, uniting the fractured Iberian kingdoms under a single Christian banner with the fall of Granada. It is an achievement that reverberates through all of Christendom, and in a move that would forever alter the maps of the world, they have recently funded a rather tenacious Genoese explorer's voyage west, hoping to find a new route to the Indies. This sponsorship of Christopher Columbus is, of course, a monumental fact of their reign, a detail taught in every school. Yet, from this vantage point, it feels like just one more calculated risk in a portfolio of immense ventures. But here, away from the grand pronouncements and the signing of treaties, we see them in a different light. They are not just monarchs. They are parents, and they have 5 children, each a precious, carefully crafted tool of state. Their court is not one of flamboyant frivolity. It is pious, sombre, and deeply, almost uncomfortably, formal. You notice the pervasive rustle of dark velvets and heavy brocades, often in severe blacks and deep reds. Fashion here isn't about expression. It's about conveying status and piety, which means the general vibe is less spring collection and more very important, very solemn funeral. A soft clinking of rosary beads is a constant background noise, and a faint, lingering scent of church incense and beeswax seems to have soaked into the heavy wool tapestries and the dark, carved wooden furniture. The etiquette is so rigid it feels almost suffocating. Every movement is prescribed, every word weighed. A misplaced glance or an unapproved conversation can become a minor scandal, noted and discussed in hushed tones. This was a court that made other European royal houses look like a chaotic weekend barbecue. At its centre is Isabella, a queen of renowned pale skin and piercing blue-grey eyes. She is methodical, strong-willed, and legendarily clean, demanding a level of hygiene in her household that was nearly unheard of in the 15th century. This fastidiousness extended to the spiritual well-being of her court. She was the architect of its austere tone, the keeper of its formidable conscience. Historians still argue whether Isabella's deep piety was the very core of her identity, or a masterfully wielded tool of statecraft, a way to project an image of divine authority. Perhaps, like the mudéjar art on the walls, the two were so intricately entwined they could not be separated. Her children are her dynasty's future, their blood a currency to be spent wisely on the political landscape of Europe. This is the original high-stakes international dating show, and Isabella is the ultimate, unsmiling producer. Every marriage is a treaty, every grandchild a potential alliance. First, there is Isabella, the eldest, named for her mother. She is dispatched to be the wife of the heir of Portugal, a crucial marriage to secure peace on their western border. Then comes the hope of the nation, the golden boy, Prince John. After him is Joanna, a quiet, intense girl with the fair skin and auburn hair of her maternal line, and a disposition that a gentle observer might call thoughtful, or perhaps pensive. She is clever, known for her skill in Latin, but also possessed of a fierce, passionate nature that occasionally seems at odds with the court's mandated restraint. The younger two, Maria and Catherine, the future Catherine of Aragon, a name that will echo through English history as the first wife of Henry VIII, are also waiting in the wings, their futures already being plotted on the grand map of European influence. But all eyes, all hopes are on John. As the only son, he is the Prince of Asturias, the undisputed heir. From the moment of his birth, his life has been a carefully managed project. His education is meticulous, filled with Latin, theology, law, music, swordsmanship, and the intricate unspoken dance of diplomacy. He is described as being of delicate health, never robust, but possessing a kind and thoughtful nature that has won the affection of the court. He is the repository of all his parents' dreams, the guarantee that their unified Spain will endure. When he smiles, the sombre court seems to breathe a little easier. To secure this future, Isabella and Ferdinand arrange a truly brilliant match, a diplomatic coup, a double wedding alliance with the powerful Habsburg dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire. John will marry Margaret of Austria, the brilliant and sought-after daughter of Emperor Maximilian I. In a reciprocal move, their daughter Joanna will be sent north to the damp, grey lands of Flanders to marry Margaret's brother, Philip, Duke of Burgundy, known to posterity as Philip the Handsome. It is a masterstroke, encircling their main rival France with a web of Spanish Habsburg power. In 1497, Margaret of Austria arrives in Spain. She is witty, accomplished and charming, and she and Prince John are, by all accounts, immediately and deeply smitten with one another. Theirs is that rarest of royal arrangements, a genuine love match. The court for once allows itself a moment of genuine joy, celebrating their wedding with uncharacteristic lavishness. For a few brief, shining months, the future of Spain seems incandescently bright. John and Margaret are young, deeply in love, and poised to inherit the most powerful throne in Christendom. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from the grandees and bishops. The great plan is working. The succession is absolutely secure. But the baked plains of Castile hold a quiet menace in their summer heat. Fevers and fluxes are a constant, unwelcome guest in every household, from the poorest hovel to the most opulent palace. Not long after his wedding, while the court is staying in the ancient university city of Salamanca, Prince John falls gravely ill. A sudden, violent fever takes hold of his body, a virulent fire that no royal physician can seem to quench. Imagine the suffocating stillness of the sick room. The finest doctors in the kingdom are summoned, their dark robes rustling as they confer in hushed, worried Latin. They mutter prayers and consult dusty astrological charts, convinced the illness is caused by a disastrous misalignment of the planets, or a fatal imbalance of the four bodily humours. As a quirky but desperate measure, some might even suggest therapies involving powdered pearls or ground-up emeralds, hoping the essence of the pure gemstone could counteract the impurity of the sickness. This was the terrifying limit of their science. They bleed the prince to draw out the excess heat, apply cool cloths and force bitter herbal concoctions down his throat. Their faces grim masks of utter helplessness. His young wife Margaret, already pregnant with the next heir, keeps a desperate, tearful vigil. Word carried by frantic horsemen reaches Isabella and Ferdinand. They race to their son's bedside, their royal composure shattering against the cruel, undeniable reality of his swift decline. Here the unflinching queen who faced down rebellious nobles and architects of the Inquisition is simply a mother, watching her beloved child, the center of her entire world, fade away before her eyes. On the 4th of October 1497, at just 19 years old, Prince John, Prince of Asturias, the sole male heir to the Spanish crowns, dies. A wave of profound shock and tangible grief washes over the entire Iberian Peninsula. The light has gone out. The meticulously crafted 20-year plan for the future has crumbled into ash. The bells of Salamanca Cathedral begin to toll, a slow, mournful, heavy heartbeat that is picked up by church after church, spreading from city to city, a sound of national despair. A few months later, the final crushing blow arrives. Margaret of Austria, the young widow, gives birth to their child, a daughter, stillborn. Now look at that dynastic flowchart again. See how the lines are being violently erased. The succession immediately passed to the eldest daughter, Isabella, Queen of Portugal. The court held its breath, hoping the crown would pass through her to a new generation. But she herself dies in childbirth just a year later. Her infant son, named Miguel de Paz, Michael of Peace, is for a brief moment the heir to Spain and Portugal, the dream of a fully united Iberia. But the boy is sickly. He dies before his second birthday. The chain of tragedies is relentless, almost biblical in its scope. The weight of the crown, that heavy, unforgiving circle of gold and responsibility, must shift again. It skips an entire generation, bypasses the dead, and slides sideways, finally coming to rest, unforeseen and unwelcome, on the shoulders of the next in line. It lands upon the quiet, pensive, auburn-haired girl, the one sent far away to the damp, grey, politically treacherous lands of Flanders, the one who was never, ever supposed to be Queen, Joanna. Let's travel north now, leaving the sun-scorched plains of Castile behind. Our journey takes us across the jagged peaks of the Pyrenees, through the green, rolling hills of France, and into the damp, low-lying lands of Flanders. The air here is different. It's heavier, wetter, scented with sea salt and coal smoke. The very light seems filtered, a pale silver grey that illuminates bustling port cities, and a landscape crisscrossed by canals. This is the Duchy of Burgundy, a rich, cosmopolitan territory famous for its wool trade, its magnificent tapestries, and its far less austere approach to life. You find yourself in the wake of a vast fleet that set sail from Spain in August of 1496, more than a year before the death of Prince John. On board one of those ships is Joanna, then a 16-year-old princess, leaving her home, her family, and everything she has ever known. The journey itself is a trial. The Bay of Biscay is notoriously cruel, and the voyage is battered by storms. For a girl raised in the landlocked heart of Spain, the heaving, violent sea must have felt like a monstrous living creature. One of her ships, carrying her entire dowry, a spectacular collection of gowns, jewels, and gold plate, sinks to the bottom of the ocean. It's hardly a good omen. She finally arrives in Flanders, not to a warm embrace, but to a political quagmire. Her future mother-in-law doesn't approve of her. Her handsome, blonde-haired fiancé, Philip, is away. She's left to wait. A stranger in a strange land where the customs are bafflingly different. The Burgundian court is a world away from the solemn piety of her mother's. It is lavish, extravagant, and openly hedonistic. The nobles are louder, the women's necklines are lower, and the wine flows much more freely. For a princess raised in the severe, shadowed corridors of Isabella's Spain, it must have been a profound culture shock, like stepping from a silent monastery into a rollicking carnival. And then she meets him, Philip. He is 18, athletic, and has the striking fair looks that will earn him the epithet Le Beau, the handsome. He is the physical embodiment of the charismatic, carefree nobleman. Their first meeting is electric. The story goes that Philip was so immediately captivated by his young, auburn-haired bride that he insisted on having a priest marry them on the spot, forgoing all the planned pageantry. The physical chemistry between them is immediate and overwhelming. For a brief time it seems like a fairy tale. Joanna, quiet and intense, falls deeply and obsessively in love with her dashing husband. He is the sun in her sky, the center of her new world. And Philip, at least initially, seems to reciprocate that passion. Their life together is fertile. In their first few years of marriage, they have 2 children who will one day become Holy Roman Emperors and Queens of Europe, Eleanor and the future Emperor Charles V. But Philip is not a man built for monogamy. His charm, so captivating at first, is not reserved exclusively for his wife. He is a serial philanderer with a wandering eye and an appetite for courtly dalliances that is as public as it is constant. And Joanna does not react to his infidelities with the quiet dignity or pragmatic acceptance expected of a royal wife. She is not her mother. Her love is not a polite, political arrangement. It is a possessive, all-consuming fire. And when that fire is fueled by jealousy, it burns with terrifying intensity. The reports begin to trickle back to Spain, carried by ambassadors and ladies in waiting. Stories of Joanna's jealousy, stories of furious public rows, of her screaming at Philip, of her bursting into rooms where he is entertaining other women, of her moods swinging violently from passionate devotion to fits of melancholic despair. On one infamous occasion, she discovers that Philip has been paying particular attention to a certain lady in waiting. Joanna, in a jealous rage, confronts the woman not with words but with a pair of scissors, and proceeds to forcibly cut off the beautiful blonde hair that she believed had so enchanted her husband. The court is scandalized. This is not the behavior of a Habsburg duchess. Is this madness? Or is it the desperate, furious reaction of a deeply religious and fiercely passionate woman who has been publicly and repeatedly betrayed by the man she adores, all while trapped in a foreign court that sees her as little more than a Spanish broodmare? Philip and his counsellors certainly begin to paint it as the former. It is politically convenient for them to label her as unstable. It gives Philip more control, more freedom. The mad Joanna becomes a useful narrative. Amid this marital turmoil, the devastating news from Spain arrives in waves. First, her beloved brother John is dead. Then her sister Isabella. Then her little nephew Miguel. With each death, the political ground shifts beneath her feet. Suddenly, she is not just the Duchess of Burgundy. She is the Princess of Asturias, heir to the vast kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. In 1502, Philip and Joanna travel to Spain to be formally recognized as Isabella's heirs by the Castilian Cortes, their parliament. The journey is revealing. Philip detests Spain. He finds the country backward, the food unpalatable and the courtly etiquette suffocatingly grim. He misses the vibrant social life of Flanders. He feels like a guest, not a future king, especially since the formidable Queen Isabella is very much still in charge. He is eager to leave as soon as possible, but Isabella insists that Joanna, now pregnant again, stay behind to give birth in Castile. Philip abandons his pregnant wife in Spain and hurries back to his mistresses and festivities in Flanders. Joanna is distraught. Separated from the man who is the very axis of her world, she sinks into a profound depression, punctuated by desperate, frantic attempts to return to him. She refuses to eat. She stares out of windows for hours, waiting for a messenger that never comes. Her mother, Isabella, watching this behavior, becomes deeply concerned. She sees not a lovelorn wife, but a daughter exhibiting terrifying signs of the same mental affliction that had plagued her own mother, Isabella of Portugal, who had spent years in isolated madness. Isabella of Portugal had suffered from extreme melancholy and paranoia, failing to even recognize her own children. This is the family's secret terror, the hereditary shadow they all fear. Isabella the First, ever the pragmatist, has her daughter watched, confined, for her own good. Or so she believes. Here is a strange but telling detail from this period. To control Joanna and prevent her from trying to flee, her mother's guards would remove all the horses from the castle stables at night. But Joanna, determined and desperate, once tried to make a midnight escape on a mule, the only animal left. It's a moment that's both comical and deeply sad, a queen in waiting reduced to stealing a beast of burden in a frantic bid to chase her faithless husband. After giving birth to her son Ferdinand, Joanna's desperation to rejoin Philip only grows. Finally, after a prolonged standoff with her own mother that bordered on a battle of wills, Isabella relents. Joanna is allowed to return to Flanders in 1504, But before she leaves, the aging and ailing Queen Isabella I does something that will seal her daughter's fate. She writes a new will. In it, she leaves the crown of Castile to Joanna, but she includes a crucial catastrophic clause. It states that if Joanna should be unwilling or unable to rule, her father, Ferdinand, should act as regent. This single phrase, unable to rule, becomes the legal loophole, the weapon, that both her father and her husband will use against her for the rest of her life. It's the official, royal stamp on the rumour of her madness. The reunion with Philip in Flanders is everything Joanna had desperately hoped for, a whirlwind of rekindled passion that, for a time, silences the whispers about her instability. But the calm is deceptive, as fleeting as a patch of blue sky on a Flemish winter day. Soon after her arrival, in November of 1504, a messenger, exhausted and dust-caked from his frantic ride from Spain, arrives bearing a letter sealed in black wax. Queen Isabella, the formidable heart of Spain, is dead. And just like that, at 25 years old, Joanna is no longer a Duchess consort, nor simply an heir apparent. She is now Joanna I, Queen of Castile and Leon. The news lands like a thunderclap, and the political games begin almost immediately. Two men, her husband and her father, now circle the throne of Castile like hungry wolves. In Spain, Ferdinand of Aragon moves to enact the clause in Isabella's will, declaring himself regent for his supposedly unable daughter. In Flanders, Philip refuses to accept this. He immediately begins minting new coins bearing his own profile and the title Philip I, King of Castile. He is not going to be a mere prince consort. He intends to be a king, and he will use his wife's inheritance and her reputation to do it. Joanna is now the most important piece on the chessboard, and both men are determined to control her moves. For 2 years, a tense long-distance political war is waged between father-in-law and son-in-law. Finally, in the spring of 1506, Philip and Joanna set sail for Spain to claim her kingdom. Philip has assembled a grand entourage, a military escort, and a court full of his Flemish favourites. He arrives on the Spanish coast not as a guest, but as a conqueror. He skillfully allies himself with Castilian nobles who had chafed under Ferdinand's stern rule and were eager for a younger, more liberal monarch. Faced with this opposition, Ferdinand has no choice but to retreat to his own kingdom of Aragon, leaving Castile to his daughter and her ambitious husband. Philip's reign begins. He is young, handsome, and charismatic. He throws lavish parties and hunts in the royal forests. The Spanish court, so long accustomed to the severe black robes and sombre piety of Isabella, is suddenly awash in the vibrant colours and easygoing morals of the Burgundians. For a few short months, Philip is the toast of Castile, but Joanna is rarely seen. Her husband keeps her increasingly isolated, closely watched by his own guards. Her presence is required for his legitimacy, but her participation is not desired. Then, on a hot September day in the city of Burgos, Philip decides to amuse himself with a vigorous game of pelota, an early version of handball. Sweaty and overheated from the exertion, he calls for a drink and impulsively gulps down a large goblet of icy water. That evening he is seized by a violent fever. It rages through his body with astonishing speed. The best physicians in the kingdom are summoned once again, and once again they are utterly useless. Their attempts to treat the mysterious illness, which was most likely typhus, were the usual grim selection of bleedings and purges, about as effective as trying to fix a clock with a hammer. On September 25th, 1506, after just a few days of agony, Philip the Handsome, King of Castile for less than a year, is dead at the age of 28. Now all your focus draws to Joanna. The kingdom holds its breath, watching her. Her reaction is not one of screaming or fainting. It is something far stranger, far more unnerving to the courtiers around her. She falls into a state of silent, motionless shock. For hours she simply sits, staring at her husband's body, refusing to eat or sleep, refusing to let anyone move him. She is heavily pregnant with their 6th child, and her grief is a vast, silent, terrifying thing. She allows the embalmers to do their work, filling the room with the pungent, spicy sweet smell of myrrh and aloes as they prepare the body for its lead-lined coffin. But she refuses to allow it to be buried. She cannot bear the thought of consigning him to the earth. Instead, she conceives of a different plan, a journey. She will personally escort her husband's body from the city of Burgos south to the royal crypt in Granada, the city her parents had conquered, the place where her mother lay buried. And so begins one of the most haunting and bizarre processions in European history. Imagine the scene. It is the dead of winter on the high, wind-whipped plateau of central Spain. The procession moves only at night. Joanna decreed it so, reportedly saying that a widow who has lost the son of her own soul should not be seen in the light of day. Each evening, as dusk settles, the procession forms. At its head are grim-faced soldiers holding aloft flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows. They are followed by a choir of monks, their deep, solemn plainsong chanting rising into the cold, black air. And behind them, on a hearse drawn by 4 black horses, is the coffin of Philip the Handsome. And behind the coffin, riding a simple palfrey, is the Queen, Joanna, dressed in the blackest mourning clothes, her face pale and impassive in the torchlight, pregnant and alone with her grief. They travel slowly, painstakingly, across the frozen landscape. They stop at monasteries for shelter, but Joanna will often have a tent pitched outside for herself. One of her strangest commands was that no women were to come near her husband's coffin. When the procession once stopped at a convent of nuns, Joanna, learning they were women, flew into a rage and forced the entire company to leave immediately and sleep out in the freezing fields. Her pathological jealousy of Philip, it seems, did not die with him. Every so often, she would command the procession to halt. The heavy lid of the coffin would be pried open, and by the wavering light of the torches she would gaze down at the embalmed face of her beloved, unfaithful husband. She would touch his face, his hands, and then, apparently satisfied that he was still there, she would order the coffin sealed again, and the mournful journey would continue. Historians still argue whether this nearly 8-month-long funeral procession was a profound, if eccentric act of pious mourning, a bizarrely calculated political move to assert her royal authority using the powerful symbol of the dead king's body, or simply the clear manifestation of a mind utterly shattered by grief and betrayal. Perhaps it was all 3 at once. The court and all of Spain simply watched in bewildered horror. This strange, nocturnal odyssey of a grieving queen following a corpse across the country did little to dispel the now widespread rumours of her madness. In fact, it cemented them. The macabre journey finally grinds to a halt in the town of Torquemada in January 1507. Not because it has reached its destination, but because the Queen has gone into labour. There, in the midst of this cold, bleak landscape of grief, she gives birth to a daughter, Catherine, named for her youngest sister in England. The birth forces a pause, and in that pause, the political winds which have been holding their breath begin to blow again. Word of the strange procession and the birth of the posthumous princess has reached her father, Ferdinand. He sees his moment. The patient fox is done waiting. He is returning to Castile to take control, to restore order, and to finally, officially, deal with his unable daughter, the Queen. The mournful, torchlit procession has finally stalled. Find yourself now in a small, windswept Castilian town. The bleak winter is giving way to a hesitant spring, but the air inside the fortified monastery where Joanna has taken refuge is still heavy with cold stone and grief. Her new daughter, Catherine, is a tiny, breathing presence in this world of mourning, a stark contrast to the sealed lead coffin that remains the center of Joanna's existence. It is here that her father, Ferdinand of Aragon, finally catches up with her. He arrives not with an army, but with the full weight of paternal and royal authority. He is now in his 50s, a man whose entire life has been a masterclass in political maneuvering, a man so famously cunning that he inspired Niccolo Machiavelli. He greets his daughter with a show of fatherly concern. He speaks to her in gentle, reasonable tones. He sympathizes with her grief, but his purpose is as hard and clear as a diamond. The macabre spectacle must end. Order must be restored. He is here to take charge. Joanna, seemingly exhausted from her long ordeal, puts up little resistance. She has been wandering in a fog of sorrow for months, and now the shrewd, decisive presence of her father seems to offer a strange kind of relief. He makes the decisions. He assures her he will see to Philip's proper burial in Granada, freeing her from her grim vigil. He persuades her that she needs to rest, to recover her strength in a safe and quiet place. The place he has chosen is a palace castle in the small town of Tordesillas, overlooking the wide, slow-moving Duero River. It's not a prison, he would have insisted. It is a royal residence, a retreat, but it is a gilded cage nonetheless. In 1509, Queen Joanna I of Castile enters the royal palace of Tordesillas. She is 29 years old. She will not leave it again until she dies, 46 years later. Her world shrinks to a few dark, tapestry-hung rooms. Her companions are her youngest daughter, Catherine, the child born on the road, and a small army of hand-picked keepers and ladies-in-waiting, all fiercely loyal to Ferdinand. Their job is not just to serve her, but to watch her, to report on her every mood, her every utterance. She is the queen, but she holds no power. She signs no documents. She receives no ambassadors. She is a monarch in name only, a ghost in her own kingdom. Ferdinand rules Castile as her regent, using her name for legitimacy, while keeping her completely sequestered from the world. What was her life like for those long decades? The records are filtered through the reports of her keepers, who had a vested interest in portraying her as unstable. They describe her long periods of melancholy, her neglect of personal hygiene, a stark contrast to her mother's fastidiousness. They detail her refusal to attend Mass, a scandalous impiety in deeply religious Spain. They speak of her rages, her screaming fits, her incoherent ramblings. One quirky tidbit from her confinement, meant to illustrate her strangeness, claims she developed a fondness for a stray cat and would talk to it for hours, as if it were a royal counsellor. A joke, perhaps, to paint her as the classic crone, or a heartbreaking detail of a profoundly lonely woman seeking any form of companionship. Yet Yet there are other flickers of a different Joanna, moments where she seems lucid, sharp, and keenly aware of her status as a prisoner. She would sometimes refuse to sign papers, correctly suspecting that they were designed to further diminish her authority. She was keenly protective of her daughter Catherine, who grew up in the suffocating shadows of her mother's confinement. Historians still argue passionately whether Joanna was genuinely a victim of a hereditary mental illness, possibly schizophrenia or bipolar disorder inherited from her grandmother, or if she was a tragic victim of political ambition. Was she truly La Loca, the mad, or was she Joanna, the Encerrada, the imprisoned? The evidence is permanently tainted. Her father, her husband, and later her son all had a powerful motive to exaggerate, and perhaps even fabricate, her instability. A mad queen cannot rule. A sane queen, on the other hand, is a threat. It served them all to have her silenced and sidelined. In 1516, Ferdinand dies. For a brief moment, it seems Joanna might be freed. She is, after all, still the rightful queen. But the crown now passes not to her, but through her to her own son, the teenage Charles, who has been raised in Flanders. He arrives in Spain in 1517 to claim his vast inheritance. One of his first acts is to travel to Tordesillas to meet the mother he barely knows. Imagine that meeting. The tall, serious, Habsburg-jawed teenager, already a ruler of immense territories, facing this pale, 40-year-old woman who has spent years locked away from the world. Whatever transpired between them, Charles makes the same decision his grandfather did. His mother will remain confined. He will rule in her name as co-monarch on paper, but absolute sovereign in practice. He changes her keepers, installing his own man, the Marquis of Denayer, who proves to be even harsher than Ferdinand's guards, sometimes resorting to physical coercion and punishments to control the queen. There is one dramatic, final moment when Joanna's fate might have changed. In 1520, a widespread popular uprising known as the Revolt of the Comuneros breaks out across Castile. The rebels are fighting against what they see as the overreach and foreign influence of their new king, Charles, and his Flemish court. In a brilliant strategic move, the rebel leaders march to Tordesillas. They enter the palace, remove Charles's guards, and liberate the queen. They kneel before her. They tell her she is free. They beg her to lead them, to sign their documents, to lend her royal authority to their cause and reclaim her throne from her son. This is her chance. All of Europe watches, and Joanna, for the first time in over a decade, is at the center of power. She listens to the rebels patiently. She sympathizes with their grievances. But she does a fatal and perhaps honorable thing. She hesitates. She asks for time. And in the end she refuses to sign any document that would declare war against her own son. Whether out of lingering maternal loyalty, political savvy, or an inability to make a decision, her refusal dooms the revolt. Soon the royalist armies of Charles crushed the Comuneros, and Joanna's brief taste of freedom is over. The doors of her cage are locked again, this time for good. The final 3 decades of her life fade into a long, monotonous silence. Her beloved daughter, Catherine, is taken from her to be married to the King of Portugal. Joanna is left completely alone, her world shrinking to a handful of rooms and a few stern faces. She passes her days, her seasons, her years in a twilight state, while her son, Charles V, becomes the most powerful man in the world, an emperor on whose lands the sun never set. She finally dies on Good Friday, 1555, at the age of 75. She had been a queen for 51 of those years, and for 46 of them she had been a prisoner, Only in death was she finally taken to Granada, to be laid to rest in the royal chapel beside the unfaithful husband whose body she had once followed through the dark night, and next to the powerful parents who had made her a queen, but had also set the stage for her long, lonely confinement. The story ends not with a resolution, but with a question that echoes down the centuries. Was she a monarch unhinged by tragedy, or a woman systematically broken by the men who coveted her crown? Perhaps, as you drift off to sleep, you can let the answer remain as it is, a quiet, mournful mystery, shrouded in the long shadows of Spanish history, the savage warriors of the Mongol Horde. Let the sounds around you soften, allow your focus to narrow, drawing inward, away from the day. We are going to drift together back through time and across the globe to a place of immense, quiet emptiness. You find yourself standing under a sky so vast and so blue it feels like a physical presence, pressing down on the edge of the world. This is the Mongolian steppe, a sea of grass that ripples in the wind, stretching in every direction, until it melts into a featureless horizon. There are no trees here to break the relentless wind, only rolling, seemingly infinite grasslands. In the summer, the sun is a white-hot hammer in the sky. In the winter, the land disappears under a blanket of snow, and the temperature plunges to a level that can freeze a man's soul. This is a land of extremes. There is no middle ground. The silence is profound, broken only by the whistling of the wind, the distant cry of an eagle, or the soft, rhythmic chewing of a grazing herd. This unforgiving landscape is the forge, and the people who live here are its steel. They are nomads. Their lives are a constant, slow-motion journey following the grass that feeds their precious herds of sheep, goats, and, most importantly, horses. Their home is not a place on a map, but a portable circle of comfort and warmth called a jeer. From the outside, it is a simple, stout dome of felted wool stretched over a collapsible wooden lattice, anchored against the tireless wind. But step inside. The air is still and warm, thick with the scent of wood smoke, mutton and fermented milk. Intricately painted rafters radiate from the central smoke hole, a direct connection to the sky, or Tengri, whom they worship. This is the fundamental, mainstream fact of their existence. The Gar is the center of their universe, a warm, breathing home that can be dismantled and packed onto a cart in a couple of hours, ready for the next slow journey across the grass. Their life is dictated by their animals. The herd is their wealth, their food, their clothing, and their transport. They drink the milk, weave the wool, eat the meat, and use the sinew. They waste nothing. The most important fuel source on the treeless plains is the dried dung of their animals, known as argle. This quirky and profoundly practical tidbit of daily life means that even the animal's waste is a valuable resource, collected and dried to provide the slow-burning fuel that keeps the family warm through the brutal winter nights. There is a simple, stark beauty to this cyclical, self-sufficient life. Their diet is about as far from a balanced food pyramid as you can get. It is almost entirely meat, fat, and dairy. Not a lot of kale salads making their way across the steppe in the 12th century. But life is not peacefully nomadic. The steppe is not one big, happy family. It is a fractured, dangerous checkerboard of rival clans and tribes. You have the Tatars, the Merkits, the Keraites, the Naimans, all vying for the best grazing lands, all nursing generations-old blood feuds. Raiding is a fact of life. One clan might steal another's horses, and in return, the wronged clan will ride out to steal them back. along with a few wives, for good measure. Alliances are as shifting and unreliable as a summer storm. It's a world of fierce loyalties to your immediate kin and deep suspicion of everyone else. Into this turbulent world, sometime around 1162, a child is born. His name is Temujin. He is not the son of a great king. His father, Yasuge, is a minor chieftain of a clan called the Borjigin, a man respected for his courage but not a major player on the steppe. Yasuge himself had made his name and acquired his wife in the typical fashion of the day. He stole her. Temujin's mother, Herlun, was originally betrothed to a man from the Merkite tribe when Yasuge and his brothers ambushed them and carried her off. This single act of violence plants the seeds of a blood feud that will have devastating consequences later on. Temujin's childhood is unremarkable for a time. He learns to ride a horse almost before he can walk. He learns to use a small bow, to hunt, to tend the herds. But when he is just 9 years old, his father takes him to a neighboring tribe to arrange a betrothal to a young girl named Berta. On the journey home, Yasuge stops to share a meal with a group of Tatars, ancient enemies of his people. Hospitality is a sacred custom of the steppe, but so are old hatreds. Sometime after the meal, Yasuge falls ill. He manages to stumble home, but the poison is already doing its work. He dies, leaving his 2 wives and 7 young children utterly unprotected. This is where Temujin's life takes a sharp, brutal turn. The clan that Yasuge had led sees his small, vulnerable family as a liability, not a responsibility. The chieftain who takes over, a man named Takutai, decides to abandon them. One morning, the clan packs up its gears, gathers its vast herds, and simply moves on, leaving a lone widow and 7 children with a handful of animals on the empty steppe. Historians still argue whether Takutai's cruelty was purely personal animosity or a pragmatic, if brutal, political calculation to eliminate a future rival in young Temujin. Whatever the reason, it was a death sentence. What follows are the wilderness years. Temujin, his mother and his siblings are pushed to the very edge of human endurance. They hunt marmots and field mice to survive. They dig for roots with their bare hands. They fish in the Onon River. The proud son of a chieftain is reduced to a forager, his stomach often aching with hunger. Fine dining now consisted of whatever unlucky rodent failed to escape his makeshift arrows. The hardship forges him, but it also makes him a target. Takutai and his clan, hearing that the boy has not only survived, but is growing strong, decide to finish the job. They hunt him down. Temujin is captured and brought back to their camp, not to be killed immediately, but to be publicly humiliated. They lock him into a kangwe, a heavy wooden collar and stock that binds his neck and hands. It's the least portable accessory you could imagine, an instrument of shame that renders him helpless. He is now the property, the slave of his family's betrayers. But even here, something in him sparks. One night, during a feast, he waits for his guard to be distracted. Using the wooden kangwe as a clumsy weapon, he strikes the guard and flees into the darkness, plunging into the icy river to hide among the reeds. In a moment that proves pivotal, a member of the enemy clan, a man named Sorkan Shira, spots him hiding, but instead of raising the alarm, he pretends he saw nothing. Later that night, he helps Temujin, urging him to escape. It is the first sign of the young boy's innate ability to inspire loyalty, even in his enemies. Temujin escapes. He makes his way back to his starving family. He is no longer just a boy. He is a survivor, a fugitive. He has seen the world at its most brutal. He He has felt the sharp sting of betrayal and the unexpected warmth of compassion. As you see him now, standing on a slight rise overlooking the endless grass, he is poor, landless and hunted, but a fire has been lit within him, a cold, patient, calculating fire, and it is about to change the world. That cold fire of ambition needs fuel. As you watch the young fugitive Temujin standing on the windswept steppe, you realize that survival is no longer enough. The next step is to gather power, piece by piece. His first move is not one of conquest, but of obligation. He travels to the camp of the Ongirat tribe to find Berta, the girl to whom his father betrothed him all those years ago. It's a bold move for a man with literally nothing to his name but a handful of brothers and a powerful story of survival. Surprisingly, Berta's father, a man named Dei Sechen, honors the long-standing arrangement. Perhaps he sees the same flicker of greatness in the boy's eyes that Sorkin Shira saw by the riverbank. Berta and Temujin are married, and her dowry is not of herds or gold, but a single magnificent cloak made of the finest black sable fur. It's an impossibly luxurious item, a symbol of great prestige, and Temujin, ever the pragmatist, knows that you can't eat a cloak, but you can trade it for something far more valuable, an alliance. He takes the cloak and travels to the court of the most powerful chieftain in the region, Togrul Khan of the Karit tribe. Togrul had been an Anda, a sworn blood brother, to Temujin's father. Presenting the sable cloak, Temujin essentially reactivates this old bond, asking the great Khan to be his protector. Togrul, impressed by the boy's audacity and perhaps moved by nostalgia, accepts. With one shrewd diplomatic move, Temujin has placed himself under the wing of the mightiest power on the central steppe. He now has a patron. This newfound security, however, is fragile. The Merkits, remember them? The tribe from which his father stole his mother, have not forgotten the old insult. They come thundering into Temujin's small camp in the dead of night, seeking revenge. In the chaos, Berta is captured and carried off, a precise echo of what happened to his own mother a generation earlier. History on the steppe has a nasty habit of rhyming. This is a personal catastrophe, but it is also a political opportunity. Temujin, desperate, goes to his new patron, Togrul, and to another childhood friend who has become a powerful chief in his own right, a charismatic and popular warrior named Jamuka. Together they agree to help him. They raise a great force, a thundering army that descends on the Merkits. The campaign is a resounding success. Berta is rescued, the Merkits are shattered, and their wealth is plundered. In the aftermath, Temujin's reputation soars. He has proven he can lead, that he can win, and that he can command the loyalty of powerful men. And this is where we see the first true glimpse of the mind that will reshape the world. After a battle, the traditional Mongol way was simple. You took all the valuables, absorbed the captured women and children, and either killed the enemy warriors or let them scatter to the winds, where they would inevitably regroup and come back for revenge later. It was an endless bloody carousel of raids and counter-raids. Temujin does something different. He begins to integrate the defeated warriors into his own following, not as slaves but as soldiers. He builds his army not on kinship but on loyalty and ability. He famously declared, "He who is good in battle will have a share of the spoils." It was a simple but revolutionary idea. It didn't matter if your father was a Khan or a goat herd. It didn't matter if you were a Karit, a Tatar, or a former Merkit prisoner. If you were loyal to Temujin and you could fight, you had a place. You could rise. This meritocratic system was the bedrock of his new order. To cement this, he created an ingenious military structure, which is now a well-known historical fact. He abolished the old, chaotic tribal divisions entirely. Instead, he organized his entire society, and thus his army, on a decimal system. The smallest unit was an arban, a squad of 10 men. 10 arbans made a jaghun, a company of 100. 10 jaghuns made a minghan, a battalion of 1,000. And 10 minghans made a tumen, a division of 10,000 riders. The true genius of this system was social engineering. He would take 10 men from 10 different families and 10 different clans and make them an arban. They were now a unit. Their loyalty was to each other and to their commander, who was appointed by Temujin himself. Your old clan chieftain was now irrelevant. If one man in an arban deserted in battle, all 10 men were executed. If one was captured, the other 9 had to rescue him or die trying. This created an unbreakable bond of loyalty that superseded all previous ties of blood and tribe. It was a human machine, built of interlocking, fiercely loyal parts, all answering to a single mind. As Temujin's power and his new model of society grew, it inevitably brought him into conflict with his old friend Jamuka. The 2 men were like 2 different possible futures for the Mongol people. Jamuka represented the old way, the traditional aristocracy, the loose confederation of clans led by blue-blooded chieftains. Temujin represented the new, a unified nation based on merit and absolute loyalty to a single leader. The steppe was not big enough for both visions. Their friendship fractured into a bitter 2-decade-long rivalry, proving that even blood brotherhood has its limits when one of you wants to conquer the world and the other prefers the existing management structure. After years of shifting alliances, betrayals, and brutal campaigns, Temujin eventually defeated every one of his rivals, including Togrul and Jamuka. By 1206, he stood alone, the undisputed master of the Mongolian plateau. He called a Kuriltai, a great assembly of all the chieftains, on the banks of the Onon River, near the sacred mountain where he had hidden as a child. And there, the newly unified Mongol nation gave him a new name. No longer just Temujin of the Borjigin clan, he was now proclaimed Genghis Khan. Historians and linguists still debate the precise meaning of the title. Some translate it as oceanic ruler, implying a kingdom as vast as the sea. Others prefer universal ruler, a more direct statement of his limitless ambition. Either way, the message was clear. His rule was not to be confined to the steppe. To govern his new nation, he established a written code of laws called the Yasa. Much of it was never written down for public view, but was known to the Mongol nobility. Accounts of it from non-Mongol writers describe a code of almost terrifying simplicity and severity. This is the quirky, almost obsessive side of his organizational mind. The Yasa made theft, adultery, and bearing false witness capital crimes. But it also reportedly forbade urinating in a river or stream, and dictated that a soldier must stop to pick up a package or weapon dropped by the man riding in front of him. This bizarre mix of grand moral laws and micromanagerial field regulations reveals a mind obsessed with discipline, cleanliness, and order. You can feel the change in the very air of the steppe. The chaotic energy of intertribal warfare has vanished, replaced by a quiet, focused hum of immense potential. The feuding, fractured world of Temujin's childhood has been hammered, melted down, and reforged into something new. A nation, a people, a single, unified, and utterly unstoppable war machine, disciplined by law and loyalty, gazing outward from the great sea of grass for the first time. The silence is over. The thunder is about to begin. Now the great war machine forged in the crucible of steppe politics begins to move. Look closer, not at the grand strategy, but at the individual warrior. The Mongol horde was not an undisciplined wave of screaming savages. It was a professional army of light cavalry, arguably the most effective military force the world had ever seen. Its power rested on two fundamental elements, a kind of sacred trinity of the steppe: the pony, the bow, and the man who mastered them both. First, consider the horse. This is not the massive, heavy destrier of a European knight, bred for the shock of the charge. The Mongolian pony is a small, shaggy, and incredibly hardy creature. It has phenomenal endurance, capable of covering vast distances at a steady trot, and can survive in the harshest of climates, foraging for itself by kicking away snow to find frozen grass. Their stamina was legendary. A single Mongol warrior would travel with a string of 3 or 4 of these ponies, switching mounts throughout the day to keep them fresh. This gave the Mongol army a strategic mobility that was simply unmatched. They could cover 100 miles a day for weeks on end, appearing as if from nowhere to strike an unsuspecting enemy. And as a rather quirky detail of their self-sufficiency in times of dire need, a warrior could survive by opening a small vein in a horse's neck, drinking some of its blood, and then neatly closing the wound, providing a mobile source of emergency nutrition. Not exactly a meal plan you'd see advertised today, but it worked. Next, the bow. This was not the simple wooden longbow of the English. The Mongol composite bow was a masterpiece of engineering, a recurve bow made from layers of laminated wood, animal sinew and horn, all bound together with fish glue. It was relatively small, making it perfect for use from horseback, but it was incredibly powerful. It could shoot with accuracy at over 200 yards, and at closer range its specialized arrows could punch through the chainmail and even plate armor of their enemies. A Mongol warrior trained with this weapon from childhood. He could fire it in any direction, forward, to the side, and most famously backwards at a pursuing enemy while galloping away at full speed. This maneuver, the Parthian shot, made them a terrifyingly elusive foe. To fight them was like trying to punch a swarm of angry hornets. They would just buzz out of reach, turn, and sting you again. The warrior himself was a product of his environment, as tough and resilient as his pony. He wore light armor, typically made of boiled and lacquered leather scales, sometimes reinforced with iron plates. A conical helmet protected his head. His primary weapon was the bow, but he also carried a small saber or scimitar for close-quarter fighting, a lance, and often a battle axe or mace hanging from his saddle. He was a complete mobile weapons platform, trained for a lifetime to live in the saddle and fight as part of a perfectly coordinated unit. The Mongol way of war was not about chivalrous head-on clashes. It was about speed, deception, and overwhelming psychological pressure. This is a central, well-established fact of their success. Their military doctrine was built on cunning as much as on courage. They were masters of the feigned retreat, one of their favorite and most devastating tactics. A whole wing of their army would pretend to break and flee in disarray. A less disciplined enemy, like a proud army of European knights, would see this as a rout, break formation, and give chase, eager for glory. But the Mongols weren't fleeing. They were luring their opponents into a carefully prepared trap. Once the enemy was stretched out and disorganized, other Mongol units, hidden in ravines or behind hills, would surge out to strike them in the flanks and rear. The fleeing unit would then turn, and the trap would snap shut. It worked with horrifying consistency. But their most potent weapon was terror. Before a Mongol army even arrived, its reputation would precede it. They engaged in deliberate, systematic psychological warfare. When they reached a city, they would often offer terms. Surrender, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be utterly destroyed. It was not an empty threat. If a city did resist, the Mongols would besiege it, employing captured engineers to build sophisticated siege engines, catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams. Historians still argue about the extent to which Mongols assimilated and utilized captured technical knowledge versus developing their own siegecraft, but there is no doubt they became ruthlessly effective at it. Once a city fell after resisting, the Mongols would enact a terrifying spectacle of methodical destruction. They would drive the entire population out into the fields. They would select the artisans, the engineers, the scholars, and any other useful people to be sent back to work in the Mongol Empire. The young, able-bodied men would be forced into their army's front lines, used as human shields in the next siege. The remaining population would be systematically and pitilessly exterminated. Stories spread of pyramids of skulls built outside the ruined walls of cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. This wasn't random savagery, it was calculated policy. The message was simple and brutal. The cost of resisting us is total annihilation. Surrender is your only rational choice. This policy of terror made future conquests much easier. The next city down the road, hearing of the fate of its neighbor, was far more likely to open its gates without a fight. You'd think twice about holding out when you hear the guy in the next town over is now part of an avant-garde architectural feature made of skulls. This thunderous force first rolled west into the great Islamic empire of Khwarezm in modern-day Iran and Central Asia. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to one of its border cities. The governor, in an act of spectacular diplomatic malpractice, accused the merchants of being spies and had them executed. When Genghis sent envoys to demand an apology, the Shah of Khwarezm had one of them killed and shaved the beards off the other two. A profound insult. The Mongol response was an invasion of such scale and ferocity that it permanently altered the history of the region. Genghis unleashed his full might, shattering the much larger Khwarezmian army and laying waste to its glorious cities. From there, the storm surged outward in all directions. One wing of the army, led by the brilliant General Subutai, swung north through the Caucasus, defeated the Kievan Rus, and burst onto the plains of Hungary and Poland, annihilating vast European armies. They reached the outskirts of Vienna. They looked poised to swallow all of Europe. They seemed an unstoppable, supernatural force, a punishment sent from God. And then, as if by a miracle, they turned around and went home. The great Khan, Ogadai, Genghis's son and successor, had died thousands of miles away in Mongolia. According to Mongol law, all princes of the blood had to return to the heartland to elect a new leader. And just like that, the wave receded, leaving a terrified and bewildered Europe to wonder what on earth had just happened. The thunder of the conquests begins, ever so slowly, to subside. Imagine the quiet that follows a torrential storm. The air feels cleansed, the world strangely still. For generations, the Mongol armies had been a force of nature, a destructive whirlwind that swept across Asia and into the heart of Europe. But destruction was never the final goal. The ultimate ambition of Genghis Khan and his successors was not merely to conquer the world, but to rule it. And what emerged in the wake of the Horde was something unexpected, something almost paradoxical. After the initial period of brutal subjugation, the Mongol Empire established an era of unprecedented peace. and stability across the vast territories it now controlled. This period, from the mid-13th to the mid-14th century, is known to historians as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. It is the great, defining fact of their post-conquest empire. They had conquered the known world, and now they settled down to run it, and they ran it with a ruthless efficiency that was surprisingly good for business. The empire, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Danube River, was now a single unified political entity. The old, dangerous borders between rival kingdoms and warring states were erased. Suddenly, a merchant, a missionary, or a traveler could journey from China to Persia or from Russia to Anatolia without having to cross a dozen hostile frontiers. It was in effect the largest free trade zone the world had ever known. To manage this immense domain, the Mongols created a sophisticated and remarkably effective infrastructure. At the heart of it was the Yam, an imperial messenger and relay station system that was like a medieval superhighway of information. Every 25 to 30 miles along the main arteries of the empire, the Mongols established a well-guarded post house, fully stocked with fresh horses, food, and lodging for official riders. An imperial messenger carrying a paisa, a metal tablet that was the equivalent of a VIP pass, could ride at full gallop up to a Yam station, leap onto a waiting fresh horse, and be on his way in minutes. This system allowed for astonishingly rapid communication. News, orders, and intelligence could travel over 200 miles in a single day, a speed that would not be consistently surpassed until the invention of the telegraph 600 years later. With the roads made safe and communication swift, trade flourished. The famous Silk Road, which had often been a precarious route, was revitalized and protected. A common saying of the time claimed that a young woman could walk from one end of the empire to the other, carrying a pot of gold on her head, without fear of being bothered. A slight exaggeration perhaps, she'd at least have to contend with a sore neck, but it captures the spirit of the new security. This newfound safety opened the door to an incredible cross-pollination of cultures, ideas, and technologies. It wasn't just silk and spices that travelled along the Yam routes. It was gunpowder, paper-making, and printing from the east, and it was astronomy, medicine, and mathematics from the west. For example, a quirky tidbit of this exchange can be found in the art of the time. Persian miniature paintings began to depict dragons and phoenixes with a distinctly Chinese style, while Chinese potters in Jingdezhen started producing blue and white porcelain using cobalt imported all the way from Persia. It was a true melting pot stirred by the Mongol ladle. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of Mongol rule was their official policy of religious tolerance. As long as the conquered peoples paid their taxes and obeyed Mongol law, they were generally free to practice whatever faith they chose. Genghis Khan himself was a shamanist, believing in the eternal blue sky, Tengri, but he saw the value in all religions. In the Mongol capital of Karakorum, you could find a Nestorian Christian church standing a short walk from a Buddhist temple, a Muslim mosque, and a Taoist shrine. The Khans would even sponsor debates between clerics of different faiths, listening with genuine curiosity. This was not born of some enlightened modern ideal, of course. Historians still argue whether this tolerance was a pragmatic policy to prevent religious unrest, a reflection of the Mongols' own syncretic spiritual beliefs, or simply a form of spiritual insurance, hedging their bets with every available god. This unprecedented access to the east is what allowed two Venetian merchants, the Polo brothers, and eventually Niccolo's son, Marco, to make their famous journey to the court of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis. Marco Polo's detailed account of his 17 years in Mongol-ruled China would electrify Europe and reshape its understanding of the world. He was just one of many Europeans who made the journey, a testament to the safety and openness of the Mongol peace. But an empire built by a single man's will and held together by force could not last forever. Like all great empires, it contained the seeds of its own dissolution. After the death of Kublai Khan in 1294, the vast domain fractured into 4 successor states, or khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde on the plains of Russia. For a time they remained allied, but slowly, inevitably, they drifted apart, developing their own distinct cultures and rivalries. The Mongol identity itself began to change. The Mongols who ruled Persia became Muslims. The Mongols who ruled China adopted many Chinese customs and became patrons of Chinese art. They were slowly being absorbed by the ancient, powerful cultures they had conquered. Just as a small amount of yeast can leaven a whole loaf of bread, the relatively small number of Mongol rulers were eventually leavened by their vast populations of subjects. A series of rebellions, plagues like the Black Death which thrived along the now open trade routes, and internal conflicts further weakened their hold. By the late 14th century, the Yuan dynasty in China had been overthrown by the native Ming, and the Ilkhanate in Persia had disintegrated. The age of Mongol dominion was fading. Look one last time out over that sea of grass where our story began. The world is utterly transformed. The terror and the thunder are gone, mere echoes in the history books. But the legacy remains. The Mongols, in their brief, violent and brilliant century of power, had done more than conquer. They had broken down the walls between civilizations. They had connected east and west in a way no one had before, creating a single great highway of goods and ideas that stretched across the spine of the world. They were the storm that leveled the old world, but in the stillness that followed, a new, more interconnected one began to grow. And as you let that peaceful thought settle, you can drift into sleep, leaving the memory of the horseman to fade back into the endless silent steppe. The secret languages of dead empires. Settle back. Let the world quiet down and allow your mind to drift, not into sleep just yet, but into a place of warm sand and silent stone. We are traveling to the banks of the Nile, a river that has been the lifeblood of a civilization for millennia. Feel the dry, warm air on your skin. Above, the sun is a perfect white-hot circle in a sky of impossible blue. Beside you, the river flows, a slow, patient ribbon of green and brown, carrying with it the silts of Africa and the weight of 5,000 years of history. All around you are the ruins of a mighty empire, the feet of colossal statues buried to the ankle in sand, the crumbling pylons of a vast temple, their surfaces covered in a tapestry of bewildering, beautiful pictures. Here, a flock of carved birds seems to take flight. There, a coiled viper lies beside a single, elegantly drawn human eye. A seated man with the head of a jackal holds a staff. For more than 1,000 years, these images were a profound mystery. They were not a language, not anymore. They were simply magic. These are, of course, Egyptian hieroglyphs. Today we can read them. We understand their grammar, their vocabulary, their poetry. But for an incredibly long stretch of human history, they were the world's most tantalizing secret. The ability to read these sacred carvings wasn't lost overnight. It was a slow fading, like a papyrus scroll left too long in the sun. The last known, datable hieroglyphic inscription was carved on a temple wall at Philae in the year 394 AD. After that, as Christianity spread, and the old pagan temples were ordered closed by Roman emperors like Theodosius I, the schools of scribes vanished. This is the simple, mainstream historical fact of how the secret was lost. The institutional knowledge was dismantled. The language's light was officially switched off. A civilization's voice fell silent. And in that silence, imagination ran wild. For the next 1400 years, anyone who encountered these carvings, Roman travelers, Arab scholars, Renaissance thinkers, saw not a phonetic alphabet, but a collection of profound mystical symbols. They believed each individual hieroglyph was not a letter or a sound, but a complete philosophical concept, a secret key to unlocking the cosmic wisdom of the ancient priests. You didn't read hieroglyphs, you meditated on them. A picture of a baboon wasn't the sound it was an entire dissertation on the moon, writing, and the measured order of the universe. This was the ancient equivalent of thinking an emoji of a smiley face contained the entire works of Shakespeare. The 17th century Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher became one of the most famous and fabulously wrong proponents of this idea. He claimed to have deciphered the entire language, publishing vast tomes filled with his translations. A single hieroglyphic symbol for the name of a pharaoh might, in Kircher's hands, become a tortured, multi-sentence-long philosophical maxim like, "The life-giving creation of Osiris is procured by means of sacred ceremonies from the heavens." He was not a man paid by the word, clearly. He was a brilliant mind, but he was staring at a door and trying to describe the intricate mural he imagined was on it, without ever realizing it was a door he could simply open. This misunderstanding is, in a way, a testament to the beauty of the script. The Egyptians themselves certainly believed in the magical power of their language. This is where we find a strange and fascinating quirk in their writing system. In spells inscribed inside tombs created to guide the deceased through the treacherous underworld, they would sometimes deliberately mutilate certain hieroglyphs. A symbol for a dangerous animal, like a snake or a crocodile, might be drawn sliced in half, or with a knife sticking out of its back. The scribes did this to kill the hieroglyph, to neutralize its power so it couldn't magically come to life and harm the soul of the dead person on their journey. It's like getting unsolicited advice from the afterlife, and then finding a way to mute the sender. So the script itself was entwined with magic. Scholars still debate whether the Greco-Roman writers who first described hieroglyphs as purely symbolic genuinely misunderstood them, or if they were only exposed to a very specific, mystical late-stage use of the script, long after it had fallen out of common use. Either way, for centuries, the secret remained locked. It was a vast, cosmic wordle, and no one knew the rules. Humanity had lost the key. And then, in the heat and dust of a July day in 1799, a young French soldier finds a rock. Our story shifts here to the closing act of the 18th century. Napoleon Bonaparte has invaded Egypt, bringing not just his army, but a commission of the sciences and arts. A travelling think tank of 167 of France's brightest engineers, botanists, artists and scholars. They are there to map, study and catalogue this ancient land. One of Napoleon's officers, a man named Pierre-François Bouchard, is tasked with strengthening the defences of a dilapidated Mamluk fortress near the port town of Rashid, which the French call Rosetta. His men are tearing down an old wall to reuse the stone. It's hot, sweaty, mundane work. And then, a private named Dotpoul notices a particular slab of black stone. It's granodiorite, a close cousin of granite, and one face of it is polished smooth and covered in writing. Not one script, but three distinct bands of text. Bouchard immediately grasps its significance. The top band is the beautiful, baffling picture writing, the hieroglyphs. The bottom band is a language he knows, ancient Greek, the administrative language of Egypt after Alexander the Great's conquest. And sandwiched in the middle is a third script, a flowing, cursive-looking text that he doesn't recognize, but which later turns out to be demotic, the everyday administrative script of late-period Egypt. He realizes what he's holding, a multilingual inscription, the same text, written 3 times. A thrill must have gone through him, a jolt of intellectual electricity in the stifling delta heat. This was it. This was the key. The Rosetta Stone, as it would come to be known, wasn't a sacred religious text or a grand piece of poetry. It was something far more mundane, a legal decree issued in 1960 BC by a council of priests to honor the pharaoh of the day, Ptolemy V. But its content was irrelevant. What mattered was that it presented a path, a way to triangulate, a way to finally break the silence of the Nile Valley. The magical symbols could be forced to give up their secrets. The rock had been found, the lock had been exposed, but the door remained stubbornly, tantalizingly shut. And it would take a man of singular, obsessive genius to finally turn the key. The Rosetta Stone, that magnificent slab of black granodiorite, doesn't immediately give up its secrets. It's a key, yes, but the lock is fantastically complex. After Napoleon's defeat in Egypt, the stone becomes British property, a detail that still causes a bit of diplomatic side-eye between Paris and London, and it finds a new home in the British Museum. From there, copies and transcriptions are made and circulated to scholars across Europe. The race to crack the code is on. Now let your focus drift from the sun-baked plains of Egypt to the quiet, dusty libraries and studies of post-revolutionary France. It is here that we meet our protagonist, a young man of astonishing intellect and almost frightening obsession, Jean-François Champollion. He was a prodigy. By the age of 16, he had mastered not only Greek and Latin, but also half a dozen ancient Semitic languages, including Hebrew, Arabic, and most importantly, Coptic. Coptic is the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language, written using the Greek alphabet with a few extra letters derived from Demotic script. It was still used as the liturgical language of the Egyptian Coptic Church, a direct, living, auditory link to the pharaonic past. This is a crucial historical fact. Champollion realized early on that Coptic would be the key to understanding the sound and structure of the ancient tongue. It was the surviving echo of the lost voice he was trying to hear. The central problem remained the one set by Kircher centuries earlier. Were the hieroglyphs pictures, or were they sounds? Most scholars still lean towards the symbolic interpretation, at least for the majority of the signs. A brilliant English polymath named Thomas Young made the first crucial breakthrough. Focusing on the Demotic script and then working back to the hieroglyphs, Young correctly identified that the royal names, which were neatly enclosed in an oval ring called a cartouche, must be written phonetically. After all, you can't have a universal symbol for a foreign name like Ptolemy. He correctly identified the sounds for P, T, and M in Ptolemy's name. But he couldn't shake the idea that the rest of the script was purely symbolic. He peeked through the keyhole, but he couldn't bring himself to open the door. This is where Champollion's relentless, single-minded focus came into play. For years he laboured in poverty, filling notebooks with comparisons of the scripts, sleeping little, driven by a passion that consumed him utterly. He knew of Young's work, but As a patriotic Frenchman, he was also in a fierce competition with the English. It was less a gentle academic exchange and more the intellectual equivalent of a Napoleonic grudge match. He spent years going down a blind alley trying to prove that the script was almost entirely symbolic, before he finally embraced the phonetic approach. The crucial piece of evidence came not just from the Rosetta Stone, but from a copy of an inscription on an obelisk from the temple at Philae. This obelisk had cartouches containing the name Ptolemy, which he knew from the Rosetta Stone, and also a cartouche containing the name of a queen, Cleopatra. The beautiful thing was that both names shared several letters, P, T, L, and O. Imagine him at his desk, candlelight flickering on the papers. He draws out the hieroglyphs for Ptolemy, Ptolmys. He had most of these. Now he looks at the cartouche for Cleopatra, Kleopatra. He can now cross-reference. Is the box symbol for P in Ptolemy the same as the one in Cleopatra? Yes. Is the lion symbol for L the same in both names? Yes. And the feather symbol for E, represented by an I sound in Ptolemy, and the noose for O? Yes and yes. Suddenly he has a growing list of confirmed phonetic signs. A stone-cold alphabet. This was his eureka moment. But his final, earth-shaking realization came on September 14th, 1822. He was working with copies of inscriptions from a temple at Abu Simbel, inscriptions that were far older than the Ptolemaic period of Greek rule. He came across a cartouche he had never seen before. It began with a circle symbol representing the sun. In Coptic, the word for sun is Ra. The cartouche ended with two instances of a three-pronged symbol, which he already knew from Ptolemy's name represented the sound S. Between them was an unknown symbol. So the name read Ra-S-S. Suddenly a name from history, from the Old Testament, leapt into his mind. Rameses. He wondered, could the unknown middle symbol represent them sound? He knew from his Coptic studies that the Coptic word for to give birth was mais. So, Rameses, born of Ra. The meaning, the name, and the sounds all crashed together in a moment of perfect, brilliant synthesis. The script was not just phonetic, not just symbolic. It was both, a complex, beautiful rebus. It was a complete system. Legend says he leapt from his desk, ran through the streets of Paris to his brother's office, burst in and shouted, "Je tiens mon affaire, I've got it," and then promptly fainted, remaining unconscious for 5 days. A bit dramatic, but for a man who hadn't slept properly in a decade, entirely plausible. This breakthrough had some quirky implications. The Egyptians loved puns. Since hieroglyphs could represent both a sound and a concept, scribes would often choose symbols that created clever double meanings. A quirky tidbit. The group of hieroglyphs spelling the name of the god Amun could also be read as a phrase meaning the hidden one, a perfect pun on the god's mysterious nature. The language itself was playful, layered, and full of word games. Champollion had unlocked it all. Yet his breakthrough was not universally accepted at first. Scholars still debate whether he downplayed the importance of Thomas Young's earlier work out of personal pride and national rivalry. But there is no debating his achievement. He compiled a grammar and a dictionary. In 1828, he finally fulfilled his life's dream. He travelled to Egypt. He could now stand before the grand temples and read their inscriptions like a morning newspaper. He saw the name of Rameses the Great at Abu Simbel and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was the one who had finally heard his voice after 1400 years of silence. The door was open. and a whole civilization, frozen in stone, began to speak again. Now let us leave the banks of the Nile, with their elegant herons and papyrus reeds, and travel east. Our journey takes us over the sands of the Levant, across the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, and onto the high arid plateau of modern-day Iran. The landscape changes. The soft limestone and sandstone of Egypt give way to harsher, more rugged rock. Here, another great empire left its mark, not in pictorial symbols, but in tight, angular patterns of wedge-shaped marks, pressed into clay or chiseled into stone. This is cuneiform. For centuries, cuneiform was just as baffling as hieroglyphs. It looked less like writing and more like a collection of bird tracks, or perhaps a secret code devised by a very organized woodpecker. This script was the lingua franca of the ancient Near East for 3,000 years, used to write a dozen different languages, from Sumerian and Akkadian to Old Persian. And like hieroglyphs, its secret had been completely lost. The last known cuneiform tablet, an astronomical almanac, dates from 75 AD. After that, silence. Our quest for this lost voice brings us to a remote, sun-blasted cliff face in western Iran. It's a place called Behistun. Here, sometime around 520 BC, the Persian king Darius the Great decided to create a monumental piece of royal propaganda. He had a vast section of the limestone cliff smoothed and then carved with an immense relief showing him triumphant over his defeated enemies. Below the figures, he inscribed his life story, his claim to the throne, and his great victories. It was the ancient world's biggest and most self-congratulatory billboard. And just like the Rosetta Stone, he had it written in 3 different languages, all using cuneiform script: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. This trilingual inscription was the key. But unlike the Rosetta Stone, which was a portable, human-sized object, the Behistun inscription is perched 100 meters, that's over 300 feet, up a sheer, treacherous cliff face. Just reaching it was a life-threatening act of mountaineering. Reading it was considered impossible. Enter our next hero, another man of extraordinary grit and intellect, a British Army officer and adventurer named Henry Rawlinson. Stationed in Persia in the 1830s, Rawlinson was a man of boundless energy and reckless courage. He became obsessed with the Behistun cliff. He was a gifted linguist and had already made some progress deciphering stray bits of old Persian cuneiform from other sites. But he knew Behistun was the ultimate prize. And so he began to climb. Find yourself there with him, clinging to the rock face. The wind whips around you, threatening to tear you from your precarious handholds. Below, the ground is a dizzying drop away. There are no safety ropes, no harnesses, just Rawlinson and his nerve. He would use narrow ledges to inch his way across the rock face, sometimes having to straddle a chasm, 1 foot on each side, to get close enough to the text. To copy the upper sections, which were completely inaccessible, he would stand on the top rung of a rickety ladder, propped on the narrowest of ledges, secured only by a few local helpers. It was fantastically dangerous. This wasn't quiet library work. It was extreme sports archaeology. One good sneeze and history might have turned out very differently. Over the course of several years, in a series of daring and dangerous visits, Rawlinson managed to transcribe almost the entire Old Persian section of the text. This is a truly mainstream historical fact. His physical courage in obtaining the transcription was just as important as his intellectual work in deciphering it. Like Champollion, he started with the names of the kings. He had a list of Persian rulers from Greek historians like Herodotus, He hypothesized that a frequently recurring sequence of symbols might be the word for king. Then he looked for patterns. He found a phrase that repeated X, great king, king of kings, son of Y. Another inscription would read Y, great king, king of kings, son of Z. And a third simply stated Z, king. From this, he deduced that Y was the father of X and Z was the father of Y, and Z's father was not a king. This pattern fit perfectly with the known Persian succession of Darius the X, who was the son of Hystaspes the Y, who was not of the royal line himself. By matching the names, Darius, Hystaspes, Xerxes to the sounds in the cuneiform script, he painstakingly teased out the phonetic values for many of the old Persian signs. The quirky thing about cuneiform and the Behistun inscription in particular is the sheer grandiloquence of it all. Darius wasn't exactly known for his modesty. One translated passage reads, I am Darius, the great king, king of kings, king of countries containing all kinds of men, king in this great earth far and wide. It goes on like this for quite some time. He essentially carved his resume onto a mountain, making it quite possibly the most difficult to ignore CV in history. Having cracked Old Persian, Rawlinson now had his own personal Rosetta Stone on a cliff face. He could use the Persian text as a guide to unlock the other two, far more complex languages, Elamite and Babylonian. Babylonian in particular was a huge prize. It was a Semitic language, related to Hebrew and Arabic, and it was the language of ancient Babylon and Assyria, the language of Hammurabi, of Nebuchadnezzar, the tongue in which the Epic of Gilgamesh was first written down. But its script was a nightmare. Unlike Old Persian, which was mostly a syllabary, Babylonian cuneiform was a complex mix of syllabic signs, logograms, signs for whole words, and determinatives, silent signs that indicated the category of a word, like wood or God. It took Rawlinson and a handful of other brilliant scholars like Edward Hincks and Jules Oppert another decade of painstaking work. They were in competition, but they also shared their findings, building on each other's breakthroughs. Scholars still debate who deserves the ultimate credit for the final decipherment of Babylonian cuneiform, a controversy sometimes called the War of the Wedges. But there's no question that Rawlinson's death-defying work at Behistun laid the essential foundation. By the mid-1850s, the secret of cuneiform had been unlocked. A whole chorus of ancient voices could now be heard. Suddenly, we could read the diplomatic letters between pharaohs and Hittite kings. We could read the legal codes of Hammurabi. We could read the astronomical diaries of Babylonian priests, which were so precise they recorded the positions of the planets and the dates of eclipses. Thousands upon thousands of clay tablets, which had been silent, enigmatic bricks for 2 millennia, could now speak of trade deals, marriage contracts, school lessons, and epic poems. The bird tracks in the mud had resolved into a lost library, thanks to a few stubborn scholars and one man brave enough to climb a cliff. Our final journey takes us away from the old world, away from the deserts and sun-baked cliffs of Africa and Asia. Let your mind travel across the vast blue expanse of the Atlantic Ocean to the hot, humid, and impossibly green world of the Mesoamerican jungle. Here, hidden beneath a thick blanket of tangled vines and the shade of giant saber trees, the ruins of another magnificent civilization lie sleeping. These are the cities of the Maya. For centuries, their pyramids, more graceful and steeply stepped than their Egyptian counterparts, have poked through the jungle canopy. Their palaces and ball courts were reclaimed by nature, their stone surfaces covered in a slick green coat of moss and lichen, and on those stones, on monumental pillars called stelae, on lintels above doorways, and on exquisitely painted pottery, the Maya left behind their own unique and beautiful form of writing. Maya hieroglyphs are, at first glance, a world apart from the scripts we've seen before. They are not the elegant lines of Egypt or the sharp wedges of Persia. Maya glyphs are round, fleshy, almost alive. They are often anthropomorphic, containing the heads of gods, the bodies of animals, or contorted human figures, all packed neatly into puffy, rounded squares called glyph blocks. For a long time, much like early Egyptology, Western scholars believed these could not be a true writing system. They saw them as a mystical form of art, a collection of calendrical signs and symbolic representations of deities and cosmic events, not a language you could read. The figures were too complex, too artistic, too weird. The first major breakthrough was in fact the calendar. By the early 20th century, scholars had painstakingly figured out the intricate Maya calendrical systems, the 260-day sacred calendar and the 365-day solar calendar, woven together into a 52-year cycle. This is a mainstream historical fact and was the foundation of all early Maya studies. They could read the dates on the stelae, and they could identify the glyphs for kings and the emblems of city-states. This meant they knew when things happened and who was involved, but they had no idea what those rulers were actually doing. They could read the chapter titles of Maya history, but the story itself remained a total mystery. It was like looking at a beautifully illustrated comic book with all the speech bubbles painted over. A key figure in the story of the decipherment was the English scholar J. Eric S. Thompson, who dominated the field for decades. Thompson was a brilliant archaeologist, but he was stubbornly convinced that the glyphs, aside from the dates, were purely ideographic and mystical. He believed they recorded not history, but only esoteric ponderings about the passage of time and the movements of the gods. He created a cataloguing system for the glyphs that is still used today. But his immense authority actively suppressed anyone who suggested the script might be phonetic. The tide began to turn with the work of a Russian linguist named Yuri Knorozov. Working in the isolation of post-war Leningrad with only a few books and reproductions to go on, Knorozov came to a revolutionary conclusion. He had access to a 16th century manuscript by a Spanish friar, Diego de Landa, who had recorded what he thought was a Maya alphabet. De Landa's alphabet had long been dismissed as nonsense because when he asked a Maya informant to write the letter B, the informant drew the glyph for the sound be, which happened to be the Maya word for road, and so on. It wasn't a one-to-one alphabet. It was a syllabary. Knorozov realized de Landa had accidentally recorded the phonetic values for many signs. He famously published his breakthrough paper in 1952 with the defiant declaration, "I am the first to read Maya." Thompson, the old guard, furiously rejected his findings for years, but the seeds of a new understanding had been planted. The next major leap came from Tatiana Proskuryakov, an architect by training, who noticed a pattern in the dates on the stelae at the site of Piedras Negras. She realized that a series of stelae dedicated to a single ruler featured a birth glyph and, on a later monument, an accession glyph, followed by a reign of a plausible human lifespan. This was not cosmic mythology. This was the recorded history of kings and queens, their births, their inaugurations, their battles. The final synthesis came in the 1970s and 80s when a new generation of scholars like Linda Shaley and David Stewart, armed with Knorozov's phonetic insights and Proskuryakov's historical framework, came together. Famously, at a conference in Palenque in 1973, they gathered around a blackboard and in a single frenetic, weekend-long session worked out the entire dynastic history of the city. The dam had broken. They realized Maya was a logosyllabic script, much like Egyptian hieroglyphs or Babylonian cuneiform, blending signs for whole words with signs for phonetic syllables. Scholars still debate the exact pronunciation of some words and the meaning of certain rare glyphs, but the system is now largely understood. We now know that Maya scribes loved to play with their language. This is a truly quirky feature of their writing. A single word could often be written in multiple ways. A scribe could use a single logogram for jaguar, Balaam, or they could spell it out phonetically with 3-syllable signs, Balama. Or they could even combine the two, using the logogram for jaguar and adding a ma sign as a phonetic complement, just to remind you the word ends that way. It gave the scribes immense artistic freedom. It's like being able to spell the word release as R-E-L-E-A-S-E, or by drawing a little picture of a dove being let go from a hand, or by drawing the dove and then writing S next to it. It's a writer's and an artist's dream, and a decipherer's nightmare. As we read their texts today, we hear the voices of jungle kings bragging about their conquests, their ritual sacrifices, their noble parentage. We can read the detailed histories painted on funerary vases. We hear not just the abstract movements of the cosmos, but the very human stories of a vibrant, complex and often warlike civilization. From the silent tombs of Egypt, to the wind-swept cliffs of Persia, to the humid jungles of Mesoamerica, the pattern is the same. A lost voice, a long silence filled with myth and misunderstanding, a key discovered by chance, and finally, the patient, obsessive work of a few brilliant minds who refused to accept that the dead could not speak. Now, as the soft quiet of the evening settles around you, let these ancient voices, the pharaohs, the great kings, the jungle lords, lull you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Their secrets are safe with us now.